Joining me now, Gordon Chang, columnist, attorney, author of the book, The Coming Collapse of China, the book, The Nuclear Showdown. Gordon spent almost 2 decades working in Shanghai and Hong Kong. Great to have you with us. Gordon, now let's start with first the Africa prosperity, this initiative enunciated by John Bolton, the president's national security advisor. It seems it couldn't have been more poorly timed or more poorly placed than Africa, for crying out loud.
Yeah, it's poorly executed as well because it's unresourced. You know, Bolton has said to African nations, look, you got to choose between China and Russia on one side or the United States on the other. Well, with China dumping so much money in there, that's an easy question for those countries. We're going to lose that one. If we're going to challenge the Chinese and Russians in Africa, let's at least do it in a way that we can prevail. But as you point out, look, we've got other priorities right now, and that's certainly much closer to home because you have the Russians cooperating with the Venezuelans. You have the Chinese putting Venezuela into a debt trap. And so clearly you have both Moscow and Beijing challenging us just miles from our borders.
And without apparent response. This is a curious, if you will, bifurcation of interest, U.S. interest, to suddenly focus on Africa, where the Chinese have, for the past at least decade and a half, been investing, buying, and controlling commodities, and whether it be rare earth, whether it be metals, whatever it may be. They have such an advance in the region of the African continent that it's unimaginable that there would not be a strategy and, as you say, resources articulated by the administration if they're going to come up with some sort of African initiative.
You know, the most important thing right now in terms of our security is what's happening on our southern border, because you have all of these people leaving their countries. And the reason why is because those countries are doing very poorly. Yeah. And this is going to be a continuing problem. But, you know, the United States, administration in and administration out, have really just neglected Latin America. You can think back only until Grenada in the Reagan administration, right, when it was at the top of our foreign policy priorities.
And Panama, which we invaded, of course, and it took, anyway, to look back on it is unhelpful, I suppose, at this point, because we have watched president after president ignore what is an appropriate strategic response, it would seem, at least to me, rather than investing trillions of dollars. And now, by the way, the clever U.S. multinationals are understanding it's time to move out of China because that promise is not going to be fulfilled. Even the denizens of corporate America are starting to awaken. But they also lost the opportunity of investing in South America, Central America, and building up this region and creating markets. It is the most, and it has been going on, and by the way, I'm not saying this now, I've been saying it for 20 years. This is just wrong-headedness driven by divided loyalties among U.S. multinationals.
When you go back millennia, countries do one thing. They secure their borders. They do that first before they do other things. We're sort of like the opposite.
Oh, yeah, we're much too clever to be smart. You know.
Yeah. And, you know, you think about it, November 2013, John Kerry, Secretary of State, says, look, we're abandoning the Monroe Doctrine. You know, the Monroe Doctrine is...
It was a great November when he did that.
You know, this is the doctrine that the United States says we're opposing colonialism in our region. Now, why would we want free and independent countries in our regions to be colonies of foreign powers? I just don't get it.
Yeah, we're beyond now colonization. We're talking now about 2 world powers that are now in this hemisphere, and they're staying. It's pretty clear. There has not been so much as a riposte in the most subtle, nuanced, even vague way on the part of the United States to their initiative to assert their influence and direct opposition to the United States in this hemisphere. What are we to do?
Yeah, well, I think that what we first of all got to do is have some leadership on the part of the White House to make sure that multinationals understand the importance of investing in our own region. I think President Trump has done something like that by trying to get the supply chains out of China. If we can get them out of China, we can get them into our region. We can then tie their economies more closely to ours. Then I think a number of these problems go away.
That often escapes the attention of the national left-wing media. that the president's policy of balanced trade, reciprocal trade, fair trade is already driving U.S. multinationals who had invested in plant and offshoring in China. Those supply chains are moving rather quickly to Vietnam and to other southeastern nations. As to Russian nuclear-capable bombers, two of them in this instance, in Venezuela. We know that the Iranians also have interest in Venezuela. We also know that Ecuador is a victim of a Chinese debt trap that is now come due. And that they've taken effective control of the canal. They're dominating Panama without any question whatsoever. The U.S. response in terms of the military presence of Russia, what should it be?
Well, you know, we go back to 1962 and what the Kennedy administration did during the missile crisis. You know, in Cuba, you have a number of installations which once were Soviet, maybe now Russian. There's some hints that the Chinese are coming back into Cuba, you know, with listening to our phone conversation in traffic.
Yeah, by the way, there's not been a single public response to those embassy personnel who were hit by some sort of sonic weapon, and many of whom had debilitating consequences, who are still injured as a result.
And because we didn't do anything about the sonic attacks on our diplomats in Cuba, the Chinese have now done it in Guangzhou against us. And so this thing is spreading.
Gordon Chang, thanks so much. It is time, perhaps, for the American people to be alert to the threats, whether it be an invasion of a caravan of Central American migrants, whether it be the presence of nuclear-capable bombers, Russian bombers in our hemisphere, or a China that fully means to dominate not just its natural hegemonic sphere of influence, but the whole world.
Colonize is the word. Yeah. China's colonization of Latin America.
Well, and whatever you call it, it is a contest that it is becoming extraordinarily more critical every day.